Manny, I found a cool video. Want to check it out?
Yeah, dude.
Hey, bro.
Hey, man, what's up? What's going on, man?
You need some spice in your life?
I don't know about that.
This? Prime. Saudi Arabian quality.
I don't know
right
about
here.
that, dude. My mom told me to never do that, you know? My mom told me to never do that. Dang it, man. With these grades and my SAT score, I'm never gonna make it into Caltech. Guess I have to study for the SAT again. Y equals mx plus b out.
Anak!
Oh, what?
Direct member repa-repa!
I wasn't doing it. I'm sorry.
Hey, bro, what you looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry, dude. I was daydreaming, but it's against my ethics, man. It's really against me. I'm sorry, dude. Have a good one, though. Have a good one.
But it's Prime.
That was actually a really good video, you know? Those actors were amazing,
fine.
man. They were pretty amazing. But you know what that actually reminded me of?
What?
This guy mentioned something about ethics, and I immediately thought of yesterday. I saw a documentary. It was about the Agori tribe in India.
The Agori?
Yeah, the Agori.
Maybe the Atari?
The Agori tribe is an indigenous tribe located in India following a sect of Hinduism consisting of only 70 people. Their goal is to reject societal beliefs in order to become closer to their god and to achieve moksha, an escape from the cycle of reincarnation. To do this, they drink urine, eat feces, smother human ashes over their face, and practice cannibalism. To them, these actions aren't grotesque or unethical, but it's a way for them to become closer to their god and to achieve moksha.
But what do these two situations have in common? Both cases involve ethics. The spice dealer introduced the aspect of learning ethics from past experiences. As for the Agori, they introduced the topic of placing religious values over societal ethics. The first knowledge claim that we have gathered is this: different cultural groups follow different sets of ethics. Oftentimes, these ethics are formed through past events, but the main driver for the majority of groups across the world is the foundation of religion as a source of these ethics. Globally, you can see a difference in ethical standards between, say, a Christian nation like the United States and a Hindu nation like India. However, on an even more personal scale, these differences appear intra-religiously. Because of the large pantheon of Hindu gods, this can cause a disparity between the practices and, more importantly, the values of each sect of Hinduism. In the case of the Agori, their cultural practices, albeit grotesque and disturbing in our eyes, were developed by them because of their connection to their god. The Agori's insistence that they reject societal values seems backwards to us. But from looking at the situation from their point of view, one can see that they can believe that our reliance on technology, on societal feedback through social media, for say, is just as grotesque to them as if we were to be eating our dead relatives.
Another knowledge claim that we extracted from this RLS is if a higher authority tells the people to do something, then the people should naturally follow it. So this idea of authority worship is nothing new to us. Almost natural because we easily accept the words of a higher power, specifically because they have power over us. For example, a chain of command exists within the military. So those under the orders follow the orders of the higher-ups. So for example, if I were to give orders to shoot this man right here, I would do so because I was told by my commanding officer. No questions asked, my only job is to follow the knowledge I gained from my higher-ups. With the reference of the spice dealing, the young man adhered to these words of his parent and refused to accept the deal. This is because he was told not to take part in it by a higher power, in this case, the parent. And this parent supersedes the power of the dealer who he had barely met. So in this case, with the Agori, the correct way for them is to get closer with their god is by committing atrocities that society would normally not accept.
When discussing the real-life situation, we wanted to place a focus on the different ethics between societies and how these different ethics stop us from perceiving the knowledge gained from other societies. Therefore, these two knowledge claims led us into developing our knowledge question, which is, to what extent does societal ethics influence the acceptance of religious knowledge? To answer this, we need to define a few words in our knowledge question. Societal ethics could be defined as the standards of values through a consensus amongst a large group of people. Religious knowledge could be defined as knowledge gained through a spiritual practice, readings, or teachings from a pious leader. Accepting religious knowledge can mean adhering to the teachings of the religion, and it can also mean accepting information that is gained through the religion. To fully understand this knowledge question, however, we will be exploring the areas of knowledge of ethics and religion, while additionally exploring the ways of knowledge, such as faith, intuition, as well as reason.
So exploring our RLS and QQ, one area of knowledge that we wanted to focus on was faith. Specifically the question, can it be justified for religion to precede widely accepted values? As in, can we trust holy books or higher beings, such as gods, to dictate what we believe in ethically? One theory that we researched supports this, called the divine command theory.
If you love me, obey my commandments.
Hey CJ. Hey, wake up, man.
So what is the divine command theory? The divine command theory is a philosophical view that states that people should gain their knowledge of ethics from their own respective gods or God. Specifically, the theory entails the idea that if God wills a command, people should follow it because it is justified and virtuous. Now, most historians say this theory or the ideology originated back when people started believing in gods to justify natural disasters. This would eventually seep into the ideas of many modern religions nowadays, like Christianity and Catholicism. To many adherents of religion, God justifies the rules of society, which of course includes morality or ethics. I mean, logically, if you believe that God or high power is omnipotent or the omnipotent creator of everything, then you can reasonably conclude that his words should be a guideline towards living an ethically good life.
So, why do people follow the divine command theory? Well, it's because it's simple and easily applicable. How should people find out what to do? Simple. Go ask God. What did he say in the Bible? Every society needs a form of ethical system, and by the divine command theory, look nowhere further than God. However, while the divine command theory does give us a basis for our moral values, there are some problems that exist within it. Many philosophers disagreed with this theory, stating that they had found some vague or even contradictory ideas.
For example, let us address a dilemma that Plato wrote in a dialogue called the Euthyphro. The Euthyphro seeks to define piety and righteousness and how it can be justified. In most of his stories, Plato uses real-life characters. So, in this dialogue, he uses his teacher Socrates and Euthyphro. The scene is set in outside the Athenian court, where Socrates is preparing to defend himself against charges that would constitute the death penalty, as well as other charges for corrupting the youth and disbelieving the gods. He sees another man named Euthyphro, who is also awaiting his trial, and he goes to talk to him. However, Socrates becomes shocked after hearing that Euthyphro is there to prosecute his own father. The conversation between the two men begins to deviate towards the morality of what is right and what is wrong. As a believer of the divine command theory, Euthyphro is certain that prosecuting his father is the ethically correct thing to do because it's dictated by none other than the gods. Yet, Socrates disagrees with this ideology and counters with a question that discusses the justification of believing in the gods themselves. He asks, is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Or is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious? Or in layman's terms, is it morally good because it is commanded by God? Or is what is morally good commanded by God because it is morally good itself?
While sounding very similar to one another, these two questions actually state two very different things. The first question states that right acts are right because God commands it. Essentially, any and all things proclaimed by God is inherently ethically correct. So in that sense, all good is created by God. Yet, as we've seen time and time in the Bible, God commands some very unethical things that we normally wouldn't see as correct, like the genocide of the Canaanites. Using reason as a way of knowing, it doesn't seem at all reasonable for God to be able to command these kind of things and for us to still say it's completely ethical, especially as he constantly does this, like for example with Abraham ordering to kill his own son. It can be restated to say that God commands what he wishes to command, but at this point, morality has no purpose for existing because there's no set example or foundation. All that would matter is that God has decreed it, and therefore you should follow it with no questions asked because it is God.
Now, this differs from the first question because it shows God using another standard that he did not create. This brings up the problem that God may not be omnipotent because the question states that God is commanding it because it is morally good, as in, it had been decided to have been morally good already, but not by God himself. Now, how do you think people would feel if this omnipotent being named God, who had been said to create everything, both the physical and mental world, was using a construct that had already been decided? That would mean that God is binded to an ideology created by someone or even something else. So, by definition of omnipotent, God is not an all-powerful being because there are still things that he cannot do or must follow. And by extension, the question arises, would we need to listen to God at that point? So, in conclusion, the dilemma is that the first conclusion results in morality having no meaning, since God is omnipotent and can say whatever he wishes to, and in the second conclusion, God is bound to the beliefs of another being, which disproves his omnipotence.
But on the topic of God's preeminence, Thomas Aquinas, another philosopher, has also questioned God's omnipotence.
I believe that people believe in God because God is all-powerful and all-knowing. But I'm here to disprove this. You see, if there is such an existence of an all-powerful being like God, then this being must yield to the bounds of reason and not cause contradictions. In the areas of mathematics, God cannot simply say that a right angle is not 90 degrees. In the area of ethics and morality, God finds his biggest point of contention in his existence. So, if people believe that God is a perfect being, then therefore God cannot sin. For sinning is an imperfect action by its definition. But if God cannot sin, then is it not true that God cannot do something, thus disproving his omnipotence?
Returning back to faith as a way of knowing, if one prescribes to the idea that God is omnipotent, then they will yield to the divine command theory that anything this divine being wills must be carried out. So, in the case with the Agori, their religious knowledge, gained by committing these practices such as eating feces, smothering their face with human ashes, as well as practicing cannibalism, are supported because it allows them to get closer with their God.
The second development delves into more deeply the area of ethics, specifically with the idea of consequentialism. Consequentialism is the philosophical approach that argues that the morality of an action is contingent on the effects of the action. Essentially, consequentialism is the idea that the ends justify the means. Take into scope any nation that has a large focus on its national identity. The United States, for example. The insistence on overt patriotism demonstrates the concept that, as a nation, it is viewed as beneficial to do things for the quote unquote greater society. This can be viewed throughout society in the form of taxes, where people pay portions of their earned money to contribute to societal aims, such as fixing public roads or funding low income healthcare. And this societal betterment can be seen in the case of the draft, where citizens, quite literally, put their lives on the line in order to protect the general well-being of the nation.
This is linked to a wildly popular subcategory of consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism. The founder of utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill, first theorized that morally right actions give happiness, while morally wrong actions give pain. Happiness being defined as the acceptance of pleasure and absence of pain, while pain defined as unhappiness and a lack of pleasure. Because in Mill's perspective, humans strive to become happy. And oftentimes, the easiest way for humans to reach this happiness is to be conscious of the effects of their actions. Mill believed that the best way to do so is to reduce the total amount of pain in the world. If you get rid of the pain that exists around you, then the only feeling left is, of course, happiness. We do not need some overbearing being to will us to help society because we have an innate desire to helping out others. This is because of the personal knowledge that we have, specifically the knowledge of self-esteem, guilt, and consciousness. Take, for example, if a cripple was having trouble walking. There is no law that will mandate you to help escort him or her, but your personal knowledge of the guilt would help rack up if the person would possibly fall, hurting him or herself, willing to do the moral thing, which is helping the cripple out. Now, while utilitarianism may be what seems most relatable to our societal values, in order to understand the values of an indigenous group like the Gori tribe, we must look at a different aspect of consequentialism, the theory of asceticism. Asceticism is a practice of voluntarily abstaining from worldly pleasures. This can be seen in everyday life during the holy month of Ramadan. During Ramadan, Muslims abstain from indulging in one of the pleasures of life, eating, in the daytime. To an even greater extent, the Agori tribe take their asceticism to the next level. The Agori's rejection of societal norms like cleanliness, decency, and not eating dead bodies is undertaken in order to place themselves as far away from the physical constructs of human society and provide a closer connection to the spiritual realm of the self.
A counterclaim to the theory of consequentialism is the theory of ethical subjectivity. This theory, thought of by Pythagoras, states that there are no objective moral properties. Rather, ethical statements are arbitrary and relative to the person. In layman terms, the idea of ethics vary between each human being, making it subjective. Take, for example, a controversial ethical argument about homosexuality. A religious person may declare that homosexuality is wrong and unethical, but another person may think that it is acceptable and fully ethical. Which one of them is right? The religious person has experienced and followed a way of living through a religious sense. For example, following the word of Christ and the teachings of the Bible. It is his past experiences and past knowledge that concurred his viewpoint of homosexuality being unethical. The other person, however, was not under the same circumstances as the religious person. Therefore, his viewpoint of homosexuality is different because of his past experiences and his ethics. The most famous example of ethical subjectivism is the train problem. Let's say, hypothetically, that you are a train track operator. One railing has 4 of your family members tied down, while the other railing has 15 people tied down. You, being the train track operator, have the power to divert the train so that it will only run over one specific group of people. What is the most ethical answer? Do you turn the track so it runs over 15 people, saving your family members? Or do you take the majority and save 15 people and kill 4 of your family members? This is where your background and beliefs come into play. If you were close to your family in the past, your immediate answer would be to kill the 15 people, saving 4 of your family members. But if in the past you weren't close to your family, then you would most likely flip the switch to save the 15 people. The subjectivity of ethics come into play when you're answering this question, because you ask yourself, what is the most ethical answer? Is it more ethical to kill 15 random people, or is it more ethical to kill 4 of your family members and save 15 people? An answer in a consequentialist point of view is that it's better to save 15 people because you are saving the majority. But the ethical subjectivism theory states that the ethical statements are relative to the person, thus stating that there is no globally right answer. Using one person's intuition, we can see 2 equally right answers, as opposed to a reason-based utilitarian or consequentialist, which only sees one clear answer.
In the case of the Agori, ethical subjectivism comes into play when we're wanting to understand what they do. To us, eating feces, drinking urine, and practicing cannibalism and smothering their faces with human ash is completely unethical and unreal. In the viewpoint of the Agori, they are raised in a way which teaches them that what they are doing is the correct way to achieve moksha, which is why they follow these untraditional acts in the first place. Since we were raised differently from the Agori tribe, we see their acts as unethical and abnormal. However, Protagoras also suggests that although all views may appear equally true and perhaps should be equally respected as a result, they certainly are not of equal gravity. One view may be useful and advantageous to the person who has it, while the perception of another may prove harmful to another.
Both of these developments lead into our aforementioned knowledge question. To what extent does societal ethics influence the acceptance of religious knowledge? The first issue to answer is the differing ethics from society to society. The concept of ethical subjectivism refutes the idea that ethics is inherently a shared piece of knowledge throughout the world. There is no globally unified code of ethics. It instead perpetuates the idea that ethics is entirely in the realm of personal knowledge, and it is subjective to the beliefs of each society. So, to answer the first part of the question, to what extent does societal ethics influence, we can come to the conclusion that the subjectivity of ethics is what makes a distinction to the degree of which we can compare societies. Through the case of the Agori, we in the United States do not understand their ethical values. Therefore, we can't accurately judge them. However, if one was to believe that ethics is objective, and that it is one's duty to adhere to the general society, as stated in utilitarianism, then societal ethics indeed does hold a strong influence on one's acceptance of knowledge. To this extent, we cannot come to a conclusive statement as to whether or not ethics have a positive or negative influence on the acceptance of knowledge. As for the latter part of the knowledge question, how do these ethics influence, quote, the acceptance of religious knowledge? We must reintroduce ourselves to the concepts of the divine theory. If God is indeed omnipotent, then the radical lifestyle of the Agoris is absolutely not wrong, because the morally righteous motives of their God justify the seemingly sickening actions done by the tribe, which contrast against normal societal values. But the point of contention lies with God's omnipotence. If God is not omnipotent, as proposed by Aquinas, then, therefore, society should not yield to the commands of that seemingly higher power, but rather they should yield themselves to the will of the society.
These ideas can apply to many other real-life situations. Delving into the area of history, we can look into the past at the anatomy performed by the ancient Egyptians during their mummification practices. Applying our knowledge question, which is to what extent can societal ethics influence the acceptance of religious knowledge, we must use the knowledge we extrapolated. In our society today, we view processes like mummification as an archaic practice that is immoral. Yet, as a society, we ignore the harsh contradictions that mummification presents to our ethical systems. We do this because mummification is the foundation of the field of study in what we call anatomy. Because mummification was inherently a religious act, we as a society accept the religious knowledge gained by the Egyptians, which is the parts of the human body, in exchange for placing a blind eye of how immoral the act was. And this concludes our TOK presentation.
Yeah.